everybody, my name is BlakJak, and welcome to my review of Spyro the Dragon for PS1 and the Reignited Trilogy version of Spyro 1. Well, to start things off, the story for Spyro the Dragon is very simple. Basically, Gnasty Gnorc is watching the news and the dragons say some mean things about him and he decides to freeze all the dragons and steal all their treasure. Clearly, he's in the right. We, the audience, witness a man get slandered on international television and then he defends himself righteously. Spyro, being the only dragon to not be affected by Gnasty Gnorc's misered mumbo-jumbo, goes out of his way to steal back the treasure that was rightfully belonging to Gnasty Gnorc. That's right, sheeple. Spyro is the villain. He's putting chemicals in the water and turning the friggin' frogs violent. Then, once Spyro releases the captured dragons from their frozen crystal confinements, he goes out of his way to murder the hero Gnasty Gnorc. Then he steals back all the treasure for the dragons, and the cycle repeats itself. So, since I'm talking about both the PS4 and PS1 versions of this game, I'm going to start off by talking about the visual and audio designs of the PS1 games and talk about any changes that the PS4 remaster had done. By today's standards, the PS1 version of Spyro the Dragon does not hold up. By 1998 standards, however, other games have held up nicely. Now, that's not to say that I don't like the look of Spyro 1 compared to Crash Warped or Banjo-Kazooie, games whom also have a cartoony style that also came out in 1998. Spyro 1 kinda looks blocky and very polygonal. However, the game makes up for a somewhat lower visual presence with an extreme level of charm and appeal. Every enemy, every NPC, and even Sparks, the little dragonfly that follows you around, has such vibrant and memorable personalities to them. All of this being conveyed through their animations, whether it's a Gnorcling slapping his bare butt at you tauntingly, or a dragon bowing down and saying thank you. The game has a lot of fun expressions within it. The game's environments are lovely. Although the game doesn't look as good as Crash Warped, for instance, the world environments are so creative and colorful. Some of my favorites are the levels within Magic Crafters because they have these enemies that shapeshift the landscape around them. The colors within the Twilight levels are very stunning for a game that came out in 1998 too. The only characters worth talking about in terms of designs are Spyro, Gnasty Gnorc, and the bosses, some of which aren't even that memorable. Spyro is a cocky, charismatic, charming little dragon. He's very short and stout compared to the other dragons, but he is just as, if not mightier than them all. Sparks the Dragonfly is tiny and comes in 3 separate colors, yellow, blue, and green, each telling you, the player, how many hits Spyro has left before ultimately being stopped by the game's hero's minions. Speaking of which, the bosses in Spyro the Dragon range from being really cool to, wow, that was really pathetic, to just not being memorable at all. So let's start off with the coolest looking one, Metalhead. He's a giant silver robot. That's it. Robots are cool. Jacques used to scare me as a kid. He has sharp teeth and a big ugly green head, and the low poly count within the game really forces you to imagine what he'd look like in real life. Toasty's one of my favorites. He's a giant scarecrow, but if you burn off his hoodie, it turns out he's just a sheep on stilts, and that is both charming and hilarious. Blowhard blows, pun slightly intended. He was just a giant gust of wind with a beard. Honestly, I didn't even know he was a boss when I was a kid. I just kind of killed him. It doesn't help that he takes 2 hits and dies, so. Dr. Shemp isn't memorable to me at all. I think he has glasses, maybe, or maybe I'm thinking of the PS4 version. Honestly, I could not tell you. I know he has a thick butt though, because that's his weakness. And finally, the hero of our story is Gnasty Gnorc. He's big, wears a sick gold armor set, and has a big ass club. He's cool, I like him. He's on the game that much though, but he's still cool. Let me start by saying that I love the presentation of Spyro Reignited Trilogy for the most part. I do have some gripes with a few of the design choices made by the enemies and certain characters, but I'm not going to be talking about that much here, because that mostly only affects Spyro 2 and 3. When I tackle those games, then I'll hop right into those minor issues. The menus in this game are really nice and convenient for the player. Everything is smooth and has a very simplistic feel to them. Compare that to the PS1's menus, where there's a lot more going on within them. But I'd like to think that the team at Toys for Bob's and Senzaru Games made that decision to have clean, simple menus to make each of the 3 games feel united. The game's presentation is top notch. It has a more Saturday morning CGI cartoon feel going for it. I love that they gave the dragons different looks, and each dragon is unique depending on the world they live in. For instance, in the Artisan world, there are artists. In Peacekeepers, they wear armor and so forth. In Beastmaker's world, the dragons kind of remind me of the Swamp Benders from Avatar. P.S. Been thinking about playing those games for the channel. The dragons have more personification going for them without feeling too anthropomorphic. They also update the enemies' looks and feels too. For instance, the punk electric enemies in the Beastmaker world are really cool. The animations for the enemies really make them come alive, and I like that they jam out before slamming the floor with their little wand thingy. Speaking of animations, the remaster makes a lot of the enemies come alive through their animation, like the Trapper enemy with the Bowie knife. He brutally stabs you all violently and such. Or how about the Jester enemies that change shape in the Dreamweaver's worlds? They flail their arms like a wacky inflatable flailing arm tube man before cowering in fear when they change shape. But that's not to say all the enemies got an upgrade. Some enemies lost their charm or their scariness. I like to think about the dogs in Toasty's levels. They looked menacing in the PS1 game, but in the remake they're just regular sheep dogs, like herding dogs. Or how about the giant yellow beasts that look scary in the PS1 game because of the low poly count? You gotta imagine what they really look like. In the remake, they look soft and fuzzy, less scary to me. The swamp tree enemies? Terrifying in both games. I don't care, keep those fuckers away from me, but in the PS4 game, they're a little slower, which means I have more time to react to their horrifying slide and bite attack. The other enemies I want to bring up are the military guys in Gnasty's world. In the PS1 game, they had guns and they shot bullets. This dude legit threw grenades, like... In the remake, they gave the gun guys paintball miniguns, and the grenade dude a barrel that explodes. Keep in mind, this is the same game with the Bowie knife guy who literally violently lunges his knife into the ground or into the player. I feel like the enemies in that particular level lost a little bit of their charm and dominance. They're supposed to be like the elite final minions of the game before dealing with Gnorc himself, and they gave them paintball guns. Now, I wouldn't really take away anything from this game because of them. They only appear in the one level, but it's a change that persists throughout the entire collection. The bosses mostly benefited from the design changes, however. Toasty still keeps his normal look, but the added animations really make him more memorable. I like how he pokes his head out of the code every once in a while, shattering the illusion of him being a walking, talking scarecrow. Dr. Shemp was said to be arrogant, and his animations in the remake really help bring out that aspect of him. He also looks cool in the remake. Blowhard still sucks, pun also not intended, but at least he's bigger, now making him feel more threatening. Because, you know, he's a boss. I didn't mention this, but he's really small in the PS1 game, and I think that's why I thought he was just a regular enemy. Doesn't help that there are tornado wizards in the same world as him. Metalhead is sporting a new mohawk and a cool satellite dish ray gun arm. He's even bigger now. He's still really cool, but so are most giant silver robots. Jak is even more terrifying now than he was back then. Just look at this freak show and tell me you didn't pee a little the first time you saw him. He reminds me of Eustace's green mask from Courage the Cowardly Dog. You made me look bad. Ooga booga booga. You know, like that guy? Fuck yeah. I like Gnasty Gnorc's look in this game. He's very exaggerated and he feels like a cartoon villain. So it works out really well. Spyro the Dragon's audio design is a mixed bag. On one hand, the environmental sound effects sound really good and they fit wonderfully in both the PS1 original and the PS4 remake. On the other hand, the music is not that memorable. Music in Spyro the 1 kind of bleeds right into each other. Each song, although different, kind of has the same feel to them no matter the level you're in. It's kind of just background noise to fill out the level so you're not just listening to the environmental sounds of the world. That's not to say that the music composed by Stuart Copeland is bad. I just don't find myself humming it or even really remembering the music all that much like I do for other games that came out that year. Crash Warped comes to mind. But I like the piano and percussion and synthy feel of all the tracks throughout the PS1 game. The title song is the most memorable for me, probably because it's the song I hear the most. Steven Venkov took Copeland's original soundtrack and changed it up a bit, giving each song a dynamic feel to them. Depending if the player is standing or charging or indoors, the music will be slightly different. It's the same music that Copeland composed, but with different instruments and a new feel. It still suffers from the same issues though, where outside of the title theme, I don't find myself remembering the tunes very well. One thing I liked about the Reignited trilogy though, is that if you didn't like the new music, or you're a Spyro fanatic, you could always change it back to the original soundtrack whenever you wanted. Spyro the Dragon is a 3D collectathon platformer with short and very creative level designs. Spyro has a small simplistic moveset that allows him to traverse the levels quickly and efficiently. Spyro can jog, jump, glide, charge, and spit hot rhymes on the Gnorclings. He can also roll to dodge enemy attacks, except I forgot that he can do that because I've never really found myself using it at all. You know, in hindsight, it probably would have made Toasty's dogs a little easier to take on, but hey, that's in the past now. The Reignited trilogy maintains the same control scheme, but it also offers the player complete control of the camera, as well as you have an extra fire button on the right trigger. It can free up your thumb placement on the controller. If, say, you're chasing a thief and you shoot him with fire, you can just press the trigger instead of lifting your thumb to move it over and press the circle button. A small change, but it helps. And it will help even greater in Spyro 3 when we get there. Spyro PS1's camera is set to the triggers, and it has two modes, active and passive. Passive keeps the camera in place, whereas active keeps the camera constantly trying to be behind Spyro. Both are useful, but I prefer setting it to active. I prefer the remake version of freedom to move the camera in all directions, but the remake also has both passive and active cameras. Spyro is a little more tank-like in the original game. I wouldn't necessarily say he's stiff, but when you compare it to the later games, and especially the remake, Spyro feels heavier and doesn't turn as easily as you may want him to, but that's somewhat expected when talking about the first game in the series and the more recent ones. In both games, Spyro has a floaty jump with a heavy drop. In the remake, he's a tad lighter and the drop doesn't feel as heavy. Since this is a collectathon, you'd expect there to be collectibles. And you're right, there are. There are three main collectibles. You have to free the dragons from their crystal confinements. There are dragon eggs that have been stolen by those thieves, and there are 12,000 to 14,000 gems. A certain amount of each are needed to progress through each world of the game, but collecting 100% unlocks Gnasty's treasure vault, which is an extra level that allows Spyro to freely fly like he could in the flight levels. The PS4 remake also added skill points, which is a classic Insomniac Games hidden achievement system they started using in Spyro 2 and implemented in a lot of their other franchises. Doing all the skill points unlocks a little gallery. It's a nice feature, but it's not really a big deal. Also, the skill points give you more lives. Some of the other collectibles in this game are the soul orbs dropped by various defeated enemies. Collecting enough of them will grant you an extra life. You can also find these purple clams that carry lives as well. In the original game, your lives reset when you turn off the game, but in the remake, you can keep all your lives gathered. Some of my favorite levels are the flight levels, which allow Spyro to freely fly and take on a nice challenge. Spyro can freely maneuver in all directions, and he can even flap his wings. Doesn't do much, but it's a really nice detail. My absolute favorite levels in this game are the levels that give Spyro power-ups. In this game, Spyro has two power-ups. There's his Supercharge and his Super Flame. The Supercharge is activated when Spyro charges down a hill with arrows, and it makes him steamroll through most of anything. Combine the extra speed with the ramp and wonderful level design, and you get levels like Treetops, where you can just supercharge your way through the canopies of the trees, and with perfect jumps, you can make it to really hard to reach areas. It's extremely satisfying when done correctly. Super Flame is a power-up that is timed. It allows Spyro to destroy most of anything as well, mostly metal enemies and hard to break doors or chests. You get this power-up by getting smooched by a fairy. Haunted Castle even has a hidden fairy that gives you a version of the Super Flame that's not timed. It's also my favorite level in the game. I do have some nitpicks though. In Spyro 1, the levels are really short and sweet. They weren't that big of levels. They were on a smaller scale. When they remade this game, Toys for Bob decided to upscale the levels. Now, the levels are much bigger in scale. That's not much of an issue per se, but it can make a few jumps in the game slightly more difficult to land because of the distance between the gaps has shifted slightly. Now, it's not much of an issue in the first game in the trilogy, but it does become a small issue in Spyro 3. Also, the inclusion of grass in these levels tends to make gem finding slightly more annoying. Now, I know what you're thinking. How the fuck does grass impede you finding gems? Well, dear viewer, let me show you. The gems are small, the grass is big, and the grass is green, and some of the gems are green. When you're dashing through, it's harder to notice the small shinies in the grass. Now, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but when you're stuck hunting for that last gem, and it's not even hidden in a dark corner of the level, you're gonna feel like your time was wasted. Remember, these levels have shifted in scale. They became bigger, so it takes longer to comb through each level searching for these little gems. But the team at Toys for Bob's were smart. They implemented a power-up from Spyro 3 into each game. In Spyro 3, you gain the ability for sparks to point in the direction of nearby gems, and they just give you this broken ability in Spyro's 1, 2, and 3 in the remakes. You don't even have to do the Sparks minigame in Spyro 3. It's just given to you in the remake. Again, more on that when I tackle Spyro 3. I also have one more nitpick for the remake, and it's the loading times. For a game that only has one game on the disc, it's a shame that the load times take so long. Granted, you can now mess around with Spyro as he flies to the next level, but that only has its charm the first 5 or 6 times you see it. Also, what I mean by one game on the disc, I mean the Reignited trilogy only has Spyro 1 on the disc. You need to download the other 2 games off the server and put them onto your hard drive. This kind of backwards thinking makes collecting games harder for people like me who enjoy physical copies of games. If they lose the rights to Spyro in the future, or the server shut down, then what happens to Spyro 2 and 3 Reignited? Probably the same thing that happened to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and I'm still waiting for my copy of that one, by the way. So, Spyro isn't a game series that I hold near and dear to my heart like I do Crash Bandicoot or Sly Cooper, but it is one of those game series that I remember seeing and never playing until I was much older. So, I don't hold these games with a lot of nostalgia, but I do have to say the first Spyro game is a blast. If you can find a good copy for cheap, I say go for it. Now, I played this game on the PS3 digital version for this review and playthrough. If you're interested in the Spyro Reignited trilogy solely for the first game, I'd say go for it. Plus, you get 2 other games after downloading them, so that's a good buy in my opinion. Spyro the Dragon is a charming little adventure with really solid controls, imaginative and creative level design, and nice background style soundtrack. Perfect for anyone to play, and I know it's many people's first video game. So, if you have kids and want them to play something charming and fun, give them Spyro the Dragon. So I'm going to be giving Spyro on PS1 my rating of an 8 out of 10, and Spyro Reignited an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace!